It's a rematch of last year's NFC title game in San Francisco. Welcome into the Sporting News Studios for Hot Reads, our weekly look at the NFL with Hall of Fame quarterback Tory Aikman. And Troy, I know you're going out to the left coast to watch the Giants take on the Niners, and I have a very, very simple question for you. Looking at these two teams right now, which team is better and why?
Well, I like both of these teams, but I think if you look at the two teams where they're at right now in the season, I think you'd probably go with San Francisco just because of the consistency that they've shown, really throughout the season. The one hiccup they had against Minnesota, but now we're obviously having a little different appreciation for Minnesota. I think the Giants offensively obviously have done a lot of good things with a lot of players getting banged up, and Eli Manning's playing very, very well. And the one concern for me with them has been the lack of a pass rush. I mean, that Giants defense is all about getting after the quarterback. It's imperative that they're able to do that. I think that will improve as they move through the year. But this is going to be a great matchup, as you said. A revisit of the NFC Championship game last year that came down to just a couple of plays, and my guess is that this game will be no different.
All right, let's talk about the perspective of the Dallas Cowboys. I know this is a team you know very well. A week off to lick their wounds. Now they play against the Baltimore Ravens, a very, very tough defense traditionally. Where do you feel like the Cowboys are mentally right now as they come back to the field? Is this a season on the brink? I think a lot of Cowboys fans might be worried that it is.
Well, I think that, where this team is they're 2-2, and I don't want to say reeling, but I think they're scratching their heads a little bit. Probably one game off of where they realistically thought that they would be going into the bye. I think the win that maybe surprised them was week 1 on the road against the New York Giants. I think that they probably felt they'd be 3-1. They're 2-2. Coming off a very tough loss at home against the Chicago Bears, 5 turnovers. And yeah, it helps having the bye, but I think after a loss like that, you want to get back on the field and play. And, they get to go to Baltimore to try to, turn this thing around. And that's not an easy place to do it. Baltimore's very hard to beat at home. And then, as you said, for an offense that just really hasn't quite found their way yet, to try to, get it corrected against that defense is going to be a real challenge. And, it's still early. Even if they were to lose this game, I think last week's losses by, Philadelphia and Washington, within the division certainly helped their case. But this NFC East race, I really believe is going to come down to the end of the season, much like it did last year. But this is a Cowboys team that has not yet played. They did week 1, but since then they've been very inconsistent.
Absolutely. Speaking of turning things around, the Minnesota Vikings have obviously done that with a record, I think, better than a lot of us expected, and a couple great wins against the Niners and the Lions. I'm looking at their schedule, and I look at the last 6 games, and in the last 6, the Vikings have got to play the Packers twice, the Bears twice, and the Houston Texans, albeit without Brian Cushing. Are you a believer in the Minnesota Vikings, and how does this season set up for them as far as making the playoffs when you look at the schedule?
Yeah, they've surprised me. I think they've surprised everybody. If you look at the NFC North as to what was going to happen there, even Green Bay has surprised people. The way that they have struggled. They clearly looked to be the favorite coming into the year, and then it was really a question of, who gives them the best challenge? Is it going to be Chicago or Detroit? And Chicago has gotten off to a good start, and then of course Minnesota has surprised a lot of people. And at 4-1. I like their chances. I mean, it bodes pretty well then for them being able to go on and make it into the playoffs. I think the one thing that happens is when you start looking too far ahead and you talk about the way that their season ends, well, if they can string together a few more wins, this is an entirely different team that those teams are going to be facing, Chicago and Green Bay. And right now, these teams coming up are facing a much more confident Minnesota team because even though you go into the season, and all 32 teams do, they feel that they're better than they were a year ago. But I think realistically, players look at it and say, okay, we're going to have a hard time beating this team. We're going to have a hard time traveling here and winning this game. We've got San Francisco early in the season. They were in the NFC Championship game last year. But then you win some of those games, and immediately your confidence improves, and you start looking at yourself differently. You prepare differently during the week. So I think all bets are out the window as far as what we thought of any of these teams when the season began. Minnesota's been real impressive, as we've seen.
Absolutely. So maybe when we get to the end of the year, it's the Packers and Bears that go, oh, crap, we got to play the Vikings twice.
That's right.
All right, man. Thank you so much for your time this week. I really appreciate it, as always, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Okay, Tom. Thanks, bud.